Our future with AI starts today. Our next journey into the future is led by an AI revolutionary, Xavery Lisinski. A visionary leader, Xavery serves as VP of Product at Elements.cloud, where he is transforming product teams and accelerated release frequencies by a staggering 800%. With his expertise in UPN diagramming and change intelligence, Xavery is going to disrupt our understanding of org management. How do I know? He's one of the first ever Salesforce professionals to spend hours curating an AI prompt and is now hiring a prompt engineer. Okay, here we go. Let's take a deep dive into transforming org management with GPT. Please welcome to the stage, Xavery Lisinski.
So today we'll be talking about how GPT offers an opportunity to really transform org management. But let's start with a few foundations. Well, obviously, if you go to your LinkedIn or Twitter or any other social media for that matter, every goddamn post is about AI. AI is everywhere. And before we talk about how GPT can help us transform org management, let's just define a few basic terms. And I will not do such a great job as Mark did yesterday or Michael before me, but let's get a few things out of the way. You know, there are a lot of terms being thrown around, like generative AI, and that's actually an extremely broad area of AI. When we talk about generative AI, we talk about any sort of technologies that can generate text and image and video and music. There's maybe smell in the future, who knows? But there's a big area of that. And then we talk about large language models or LLMs. And the interesting thing is some large language models are generative in nature, but a lot of them aren't. And when we talk about GPT, the transformer, that's a very specific type of large language model, which falls into the overarching generative AI area. So I don't think this Venn diagram represents quite the ratios correctly, but just so you know, we're just talking, or I'll be talking this session almost about just one tiny bit of this entire AI space. So why GPT? Why do we all keep talking about GPT? Why are all the products or so many products out there calling themselves something GPT? OpenAI's GPT models are arguably the most commercially ready and available out there right now. Most products and applications you see out there fundamentally call OpenAI's APIs and the GPT 3.5 or 4 models. Salesforce's Einstein GPT integrates with the GPT 4 model. And it's also probably the cheapest and easiest to use by for commercial purposes or for business reasons. So definitely, that's why we keep talking about GPT. Now, in the future, when other vendors, other technologies kind of catch up or maybe throw a gauntlet to OpenAI's dominance, we might be talking about other models more or other technologies more commonly. But well, these days, the discussion is pretty much monopolized by talking about OpenAI's models. Now, that aside, there are some widely known limitations of any large language model, not just GPT. They are pretty generic in nature. And the name itself, large language model, it's kind of in the name that they are trained using large sets of data and increasingly larger and larger sets of data. The way they work, they predict the likelihood of a sequence of words or symbols to follow based on the examples they were trained on. But this is all based on usually publicly available knowledge or some special data sets, but your organization's specific, unique, or even proprietary policies, approaches, use cases are not public knowledge. Now, this topic of how good ChatGPT or any AI for that matter, is at or is going to be at replacing certain roles has been widely discussed, and there are a lot of great articles on Salesforce Ben, like, can ChatGPT replace Salesforce architect, a developer, a marketer? And whatever use case, whatever role you're in, the general kind of common conclusion from use case to use case, role to role is, yes, ChatGPT or GPT in general can help us accelerate certain tasks, but because it is generic, because it was trained on some data set that might be outdated, like when ChatGPT, I think, was the data set on which it was trained, the cutoff date was September 2021, I believe. So before the well-architected framework for Salesforce, for instance, became widely known and published. So there are these limitations that make, generally speaking, the GPT and any generative AI quite limited without much guidance from us humans. Now, how to address those limitations, and Michael did an amazing job in the previous session going through a lot of detail through that, so I'm just going to very briefly go through it. But there are ways of actually making these generic models quite surgical in nature, quite laser focused for our use cases. You can do domain-specific pre-training, model alignment, fine-tuning. Those things actually require probably more of your traditional data scientist, machine learning specialist to help really execute the stuff that it's actually much more easily available to all of us, either building our Salesforce orgs or commercial products for Salesforce orgs, other systems. You can inject specialized knowledge into your large language model, into your prompts, and help it become a domain expert, which I would argue is, well, it's not simple. It's, from my experience, the easiest thing to do out of those four. Now, that's kind of just the basics and the theory out of the way. Let's now get into the really purpose of this presentation, which is how org management is going to be potentially transformed and disrupted by the rise of AI and generative AI. So when we talk about org management, again, coming back to definitions, what I mean by org management is really the development lifecycle. So, and by the way, there are so many images and takes on this out there. There's no one better, potentially much better than the other. I'm using this particular picture. When we talk about development lifecycle, we talk fundamentally about the entire lifecycle of delivering features or building software, digital solutions, which usually starts with capturing some sort of request or feedback from your end users, going through the business analysis and architectural analysis stage, to building, documenting, testing, and then deploying set changes, and on we go in this life cycle. It's never ending. We release something, and then we are required by a business objective or by end users to improve it even further, maybe do something else, and we're always running through that life cycle. Now you might be doing this life cycle better or worse. You might be doing it slightly differently, but fundamentally, all of us in software development deal with development lifecycle. So now, the question I was asking myself in preparation for this session was, well, how will AI impact the development lifecycle? What is the extent of the AI-ification of it? And I came to a conclusion that if we again look at the same lifecycle picture, all the stages are now highlighted in green using GPT Dreaming's logo. I believe are areas of the life cycle that are extremely likely, if not already, to be AI-fied. And let's go through it to demonstrate a few examples. So let's start with monitoring the health of your system. Well, we all know that, and that's not just specific to Salesforce, but managing your internal CRM or your internal systems, the technical debt, adoption, the changes being deployed, kind of the DevOps and change governance side of it. There's just so many things to permissions, access as they change, breaches, security. There's just so much there for us to think about as part of monitoring. So many charts and dashboards you could be looking at. It's a kind of time-consuming exercise. At the end of the day, the job is just to figure out what is the number one priority for us to address or focus on. Now, we already know with emergence of tools like Code Interpreter, which can look at a lot of raw data and just analyze things for us, create charts, graphs, statistical analysis. The future where data is consumed, analyzed by AI, and we might be given some recommendations or priorities is approaching very, very rapidly. Feedback and help, whether that's writing end user manuals in a way that's accessible, understandable, or available in many languages, obviously. Feedback in terms of trying to understand and analyze what the end user actually said or requested. That's another area that's likely to emerge. Compliance, actually, Michael kind of demonstrated that with the PDF text analysis. Obviously, any regulation, any compliance document is very, very, very long. AI can actually analyze that and help us understand, well, answer any questions we have or help us understand our exposure very, very quickly. Then we get into the whole business analysis side. What are user stories? What are requirements? What are specifications? They're text. So in some fashion, AI will definitely help us generate that text, generate those specifications, prompts even, quite quickly. And it actually is doing that today. We know from Einstein GPT announcements that Salesforce will provide us with capability to configure flows, not to mention Apex classes or triggers, all with natural language interface. So that's we have seen that already in action. And even deployment is an area which will likely see some help from AI. Not necessarily the act of moving code from place to place, but we all know that we often get less than useful and less than clear error messages. So potentially using AI to help understand issues and spot conflicts and things like that. There's a whole area there that can be AI-fied to help us accelerate it. I don't think as far as backups, restored, and actual releases, AI is necessarily offering us much help in those areas. But as you can see, almost everything we do in the development lifecycle is likely to be impacted and accelerated by AI. Which leads me to something which I've been pondering for the last couple of weeks. There's this old famous quote from Peter Drucker, one of the most famous management consultants. And the famous quote reads, "There is nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all." And when we think about how AI is fundamentally promising us or allowing us to accelerate so many steps in the development life cycle, even one of the Salesforce Ben articles I've quoted, the author, I remember, said that whilst developers have nothing to worry about, junior developers might, because now admins can very easily start generating Apex code with no trouble. So the cost of building automations, the cost of building code, the effort, the training required to do that, in some ways is going to go down. There's obviously going to be still a huge demand for extremely proficient engineers and developers. But the entry point to even get started is going to be much lower. So is there a risk of us potentially doing things faster, but not necessarily better? So looking back at the same picture, I asked myself, what are the biggest dangers of AI-ing our development lifecycle? And my personal take is that actually the biggest risk lies in the coolest, the sexiest part of it all, which is the fact that, you know, generative AI, or GPT in particular, can help us generate flows and generate code. Now, if you know what you're doing, if you're a very good Apex developer or very good Flow developer, and you know what you're doing, then I'm sure this can help accelerate your work quite dramatically. The danger is, however, with what if you're not? If building automation is going to be so cheap and so easy and so fast, there is a danger that, well, we will just build bad stuff faster. And when I say bad stuff, I don't necessarily mean code or automations that won't work. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a big challenge to address how to write code or flows which don't just work on their own, but actually take into context the larger understanding of your other automations, of your order of execution, and kind of fit into that picture. That's very, I'm guessing it's going to be very difficult to automate, and therefore manual intervention from developers is still going to be required. But doesn't change the fact that we might get trigger happy with ability to generate so much code so quickly. The biggest opportunity, conversely, in AIing or AIification of our development lifecycle, I think, sits in the analysis or business analysis stage of the lifecycle. And why do I say that? Well, a couple of reasons. Let's put it on the table. Let's be honest. Of all the areas of the software development lifecycle, the one area which usually gets the least attention, the area which gets deprioritized most often, is the business analysis or the architectural analysis. There is more often than not tendency to jump straight into building things with very little actual proper business analysis being done. And to some degree, this is understandable. If we are working on tight schedules, on tight deadlines, spending days or weeks figuring out what it is that we actually need to do and what is the full scope, is very important, but it might feel like precious time is running through our fingers, and let's just get to it so we're ready for the release day. Reality is we always end up paying for it either during testing or after the release, or years later when we have to deal with technical debt that grinds our org to a halt. So what I think is the great opportunity with AI for org management and development lifecycle is these fairly time-consuming and yet extremely important activities can be accelerated quite dramatically with the help of AI, therefore decreasing the cost of doing good business analysis and architectural analysis. And I think, as Michael said, this one thing in his session, which really resonated with me, that I think in one of the slides it said, user stories or stories are like prompts, which is exactly it. Because if we can do really good business analysis, our stories, our specifications can be used, like Michael demonstrated, almost as prompts to do the build, whether that's of the code or communication or anything like that. So the reason I'm so passionate about AIing, I keep switching between AIing as a verb or AIification. I'll see let me know what works for you. But the reason why I'm so excited about AI in business analysis is this has been very much my focus since almost day one when ChatGPT arrived at the scene. We have developed actionable change intelligence capability using Elements and GPT model. We combine our understanding of Salesforce org metadata, best practices, well-architected standards, business processes, user stories to help actually make recommendations on best solutions for the org. So let's see how that actually works in practice. So let's start with what the opportunity here with what AI is. Now, what you're looking at the screen is a business process diagram drawn in UPN notation, which is the official notation you need to know and learn to ace your business analysis certification. Now, business process mapping, in my view, is the, or just diagramming even in general, is the foundation of good business analysis and architectural analysis. What you see at the screen is actually a great example. This is our own process. This is a process we've mapped out internally for how we want to manage and capture customer feedback. Now, there are some other, it's not a full process. This is broken down into different sections. If I click here, I can navigate to a different process. There's also a different process with more details down here. But this is part of that business process. And mind you, it all started with a seemingly simple feature request from one of the stakeholders, which was we really need ability to capture customer requests or feature requests in some organized fashion in Salesforce. Now, look at the business process diagram in front of you, and it continues in other diagrams. So doing a very rigorous business analysis, we've sat down and thought, okay, what are the stages? How do we want this to work? How do we need this to work? One of the things you might see is that before feature request is submitted to product management team, we require capture of some specific information, which I think we've been captured what that information should be, just to ensure better data quality, better data input in the process. So we have now spent some hours mapping out what our processes should be. Now, the annoying thing, and I say annoying because I've lived through this, we already know what we want. We know how it should work. And historically, we would get into the boring exercise of now, well, capturing this all over again as some specification or stories or tasks or anything like that, to fundamentally capture what we already have on the screen, because we still need to plan it, schedule it, assign it to sprints, teams, all of that jazz. Now, the cool thing that we can now do with AI is, well, we don't have to waste that time anymore. We have invested in good business analysis and business process mapping. I can now select all of my boxes, and I am gonna just generate my stories with AI. Now, the cool thing about business process maps captured in UPN notation, the official kind of Salesforce business analyst notation, is that if you think about it, it really resembles a story map of sorts. Each box is an activity. There are certain inputs. We always specify the resource of who is involved in executing an action. What is the outcome we're working towards? So this is in a way of UPNing your business processes is a way of really story mapping of how do you want the user experience to be. And that makes generation of user stories with acceptance criteria actually extremely simple. The more effort you put into capturing good business process diagrams, the more detailed, more nuanced, more accurate the user stories we can generate are going to be. Now, it's not to say that these stories are always perfect. There's a lot of assumed knowledge that comes into the diagrams we draw, the stories we capture. So sometimes we might find out, oh, that's too generic. Well, the way we've captured the diagram is pretty generic. So actually, I found ever since we started using Elements GPT for story creation a couple of weeks ago ourselves internally, the quality of my business analysis has improved, because now there is an AI looking over my shoulder and interpreting what I do. And if I don't do a good enough job, then it won't do good enough job actually translating that into well, stories, acceptance criteria, which made me think, how many years have I spent giving my developers stories and tasks and specifications which made sense to me, but clearly might not have made that much sense to them. So that's one area. Now the other aspect I wanted to highlight in context of AI in org management, and especially in business analysis, or actually more architectural analysis, is doing impact analysis of sorts. So one of the challenges with any Salesforce org, any system internally, is that they're huge, and Salesforce orgs in particular are absolutely enormous. I mean, hundreds of thousands of individual components, and I'll get into that in more detail. Now, one of the things we do as part of our platform is we actually capture your metadata dictionary of your org, and the metadata that you have, usage of it, adoption of it, dependencies between them. And just like in what Michael was showing in the previous session, just like you can take your business information, your custom information, and use it as a context for grounding or informing your prompts, we can actually do the same with your metadata of system information. So now, I have, and this is a great example, by the way, of what also I mentioned was in the previous session, that stories can become prompts. This is exactly that in action. We do have a user story with specific description, with specific acceptance criteria. Now, I can ask Elements for recommendation. And what it will do, it will look at that entire org, all the hundreds, actually in this case, it's 14,000, it's still not small, 14,000 individual metadata components, my fields, my flows, my objects, etc., permissions, and we'll fundamentally ask, well, so we've got this story there. Is there anything in this org that exists today that could be reused and repurposed to support that user story? And if it were, we would tag it as, yeah, we can, reuse. But if it can't find anything that fits the bill, it will say no. So therefore, based on the requirements or acceptance criteria, the description provided, here's the stuff you would probably need. And notice that this is still not a fully automated list. This is completely editable. And I'll get into why more in a moment. But you cannot take human out of the equation. AI, and many speakers have said this before, is here to accelerate our work, to automate the mundane tasks, but it's not gonna do our job for us. I can review this. For instance, I don't particularly agree that it should be an Apex class or a trigger. I might change it to a flow. But now this is a very concrete list of the metadata in our system we need to create or potentially reuse. So that's an example of what AI with a good change intelligence platform can do to help transform and accelerate our business analysis. What I would argue is the cornerstone and the starting point of entire software development lifecycle. Now, I do want to say that, in case it wasn't clear, I do see AI as a huge opportunity for our jobs in business analysis as architects, and not a threat. And here is why. And by the way, Mark, that's an amazing logo for that for GPT Dreaming. I absolutely love that. And here's why. There is no AIing our experience. There are so many things, intangible things that are not coded anywhere, not documented anywhere, and the only place they exist is in our minds. And that's not going to be replaced by anything. Good old-fashioned human judgment. There are certain things that on paper make sense, in theory makes sense, but we just know based on our experience interacting with humans, with stakeholders, that it's not just not gonna quite work. And a great example would be, and I think it's even part of the Salesforce's well-architected standard, there is no such thing as a perfect solution for a given problem. You need to take into account your end users, your stakeholders, how technical or not technical they are, what are their proficiencies, and that might also dictate what solution, what automation is the best choice for a given action. That comes down slightly to judgment and empathy. Accountability. There's no CTO or CIO on the planet, I'm going to wager some money on that, that is going to allow any system to just automatically go through and start changing and building things without any human supervision. And the main kind of point of my almost presentation here is prompting. And by prompting, I also mean business analysis. I actually completely agree with what Michael said. Business analysis is going to be absolutely fundamental going forward. Identifying opportunities for prompts, building prompts. Yes, there's going to be a role for a prompt engineer, but actually all of it comes up identifying the opportunities for prompts, and then what those prompts should include is very much a business analysis exercise, in my view. This is what we bring in our jobs into that equation. Now, what AI, and not, when I say AI, I'm using a large umbrella term. We clearly saw in the previous session that, you know, when we talk about AI solutions, there's an entire tech stack of APIs and models and semantic databases and all the other stuff that kind of comes together to provide those experiences. But forgetting about that for a second, what this AI tech stack brings to the table, however, is knowledge. I mean, the reality is that the level of just memory, like the number of facts and information these models can hold, far surpasses what our human minds are capable of remembering. Context. So and I promised that I'll come back to that when I was talking about solution generation. I'll give you an example of one of the orgs of one of Elements customers. And by no means, this is actually pretty average or pretty standard example of the type of orgs we deal with. 7,000 plus Apex classes in an org, about 700 different flows, more than 250,000 different reports, something like more than 1,000 permission sets, because actually they were given ability to go over the official limit. And this is just 4 out of 628 types of metadata that can exist in an org. Any org, any Salesforce org is actually comprised of just a humongous number of components. And I don't believe, especially in larger orgs, enterprise orgs, I don't believe, actually, it's not a matter of belief, it's just a fact. No one really remembers every single component, every single object, every single field, every single flow or automation in what it actually does. Now, AI capabilities allow us actually to hold all of that knowledge and assess it and find the right things for the problem we're trying to solve. Oh, you already have a flow that sends a notification to customers on case status. Okay, if you want to notify customer about some change in a new case record type, then maybe you should just reuse that flow. Don't go building a new one. That sort of analysis. Data analysis. I mentioned at the beginning, code interpreter, the whole semantic databases. That AI is just so much better at taking in enormous amounts of data and analyzing it. I think code interpreter in particular, if you haven't heard or used it yet, is the newest kind of plugin available with ChatGPT. You can just dump a raw CSV file and ask natural language questions to give you averages and build you charts. and it can do that analysis very quickly for you, which raises an interesting question of what the future of dashboards and analytics is going to be. And just simple generation. AI cannot be beat as far as the speed of creating mostly text, also code. You combine those proficiencies, these capabilities together, and that's actually where you will get the most value out of AI. And I want to say, before I finish, a shout out to Jody Herbeck, who just earlier today posted on LinkedIn that, great listening to these sessions at GPT Dreaming, but there are certain things AI won't replace. Recognizing when users aren't following what the trainer is saying, doing ride along to observe how people are using Salesforce in the wild, reaching out when you notice a team member becomes disengaged, picking up on subtle signs the new process isn't ready for automation, and throwing the red flag when you see stakeholder apathy jeopardizing the project. In the software development lifecycle, it is also a project management exercise. And whilst we can and will accelerate and even automate building of code, we will definitely accelerate and automate capture of user stories, maybe even analysis of transcripts and text to better flesh out requirements and feature requests. There's so many things we can do, but people management and the human component that is pretty important in successful execution of digital solutions is definitely not going to be affected. And that's me. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to connect, scan this to follow me or connect with me on LinkedIn. And I wish you all exciting time on your AI journey. Thank you very much.
What an awesome way to end the day today. Xavery and team are certainly on the front lines of AI and org management. If you were impressed by the AI use cases you saw today, then you will not want to miss tomorrow's sessions. Bradley Rice will be joining us to share his knowledge on Salesforce AI skills and in-org AI adoption. Then I'll be providing information on the state of native GPT-infused applications. For now, I'm your host, Mark Good. Enjoy the rest of your day.